A sharp, metallic taste lingered in Ethan Carter's mouth as he groggily opened his eyes. His head throbbed, a dull, persistent pain pressing against his skull. He blinked, trying to piece together where he was. The room was small, dust-covered furniture, a flickering ceiling fan, and a broken window letting in the faint glow of a dying sun. Papers were scattered on the wooden floor, some smeared with what looked like dried blood. His clothes were torn, his hands bruised, and his backpack gone. The last thing he remembered was approaching the city checkpoint. He had been following a radio broadcast, something about a quarantine lift. He should have been safe here. But something had gone terribly wrong. He stumbled toward the window and peered outside. The city stretched endlessly in both directions, tall buildings with shattered glass, abandoned cars clogging the streets, and a thick fog creeping through the alleys. There was no movement, no sound of traffic, no sign of life. A chill ran down his spine. Something about the silence was unnatural. Then, a noise. A single scream tore through the stillness. It came from the street below, sharp and desperate. Ethan's breath hitched as he scanned the area. A man was running, stumbling, really, his clothes drenched in sweat and grime. Behind him, shadows moved. Ethan's heart pounded. The figures chasing him weren't human. They moved erratically, their limbs twitching unnaturally, their heads jerking at odd angles. And then he saw it, one of them lunged, knocking the man to the ground. There was a struggle, but it was over within seconds. Blood pooled on the pavement as the creatures ripped him apart. Ethan staggered back, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just an abandoned city. It was a graveyard. His hands trembled as he reached for the door, but hesitation held him still. If he stepped outside, he would be stepping into their territory. Then, another sound, a low, guttural growl, just beyond the door. His breath hitched. Something was inside the building with him. Slowly, he reached for a rusted pipe lying near the broken furniture, his fingers tightening around the cold metal. He moved toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Silence. And then, a violent thud. The door rattled, dust shaking loose from the frame. Ethan stumbled back, gripping the pipe tighter. His pulse thundered in his ears. Another thud. Then another. Whatever was outside was trying to get in. He needed to move. Ethan turned toward the window, glancing at the fire escape. It was rusted but intact. It was his only chance. Another crash, this time, the door frame splintered. No time. Ethan climbed onto the windowsill, his heart hammering. The ground below was far, but he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the fire escape railing and swung himself onto it just as the door burst open. A figure stumbled inside, its skin pale, eyes sunken, lips peeled back to reveal blood-stained teeth. Ethan didn't wait to see what it would do. He started climbing down. The city loomed around him, silent, lifeless, waiting. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. And the hunt had just begun. Ethan's feet hit the pavement with a dull thud as he dropped from the fire escape. His legs buckled slightly, but he managed to steady himself. He had made it down in one piece. But he wasn't safe yet. The street stretched before him, abandoned cars, shattered glass, and the lingering scent of decay. The fog curled around the buildings like ghostly fingers, obscuring what lay beyond. The city felt like a place frozen in time, as if everyone had simply vanished overnight. Except they hadn't vanished. The blood-streaked walls, broken windows, and torn clothes left behind told a different story. A violent one. He needed to find supplies, food, water, a weapon that wasn't just a rusted pipe. More importantly, he needed to figure out what had happened here. Keeping his steps light, he made his way toward a nearby gas station. The shattered glass doors hung loosely on their hinges, swaying with the faint breeze. Inside, the aisles were ransacked, shelves overturned, food scattered, blood smears streaking the floor. Ethan crouched behind a checkout counter, scanning the store for movement. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Then, something crackled. A radio. The sound was faint, but distinct, a broken transmission, static-filled, and barely audible. Ethan turned toward the source, a small, battery-operated radio sitting on a shelf. He reached for it, adjusting the dial carefully. "If you're still alive, make your way, West District, safe zone, hurry." The transmission cut out, leaving only static. Ethan's grip tightened around the radio. A safe zone? Was it real, or just an old message looping endlessly, luring desperate survivors to their deaths? A sudden crash from the back of the store made him freeze. Something was moving. He ducked lower, gripping his pipe. The noise grew louder, slow, dragging footsteps against tile. Ethan peeked around the aisle. A figure stumbled forward, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. A woman. Or what used to be one. Her skin was gray, her clothes ripped and stained with dried blood. Her fingers twitched, nails broken and blackened. She hadn't seen him yet. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. If he stayed still, maybe she'd move past him. Then, his foot brushed against a loose can. The noise was deafening. The woman's head snapped toward him. Her milky eyes locked onto his. She lunged. Ethan swung the pipe. It connected with a sickening crunch, sending her staggering back. But she didn't stop. She snarled, her jaw unhinging unnaturally wide as she lunged again. Ethan barely managed to dodge. He swung the pipe again, this time with all his strength. The impact sent her crashing into a shelf, knocking down cans and boxes. But he didn't wait to see if she'd get up. He grabbed a backpack off the counter, stuffing in whatever supplies he could reach. Water bottles, protein bars, a flashlight, anything useful. Then he ran. As he burst through the broken doors and into the street, he risked a glance behind him. The woman had crawled to her feet, but she wasn't alone anymore. More figures emerged from the fog, drawn by the noise. Their heads jerked unnaturally, their bodies twitching as they turned toward him. The street was no longer silent. Low growls filled the air. Ethan turned and ran. The city had awakened. And now, it was hunting him. Ethan sprinted down the cracked pavement, his breath ragged, his legs burning with exhaustion. Behind him, the undead swung from alleyways and shattered storefronts, their movements erratic but relentless. Their guttural growls filled the air, echoing off the hollowed-out buildings like a sinister chorus. His mind raced. He needed an escape, somewhere to hide, somewhere defensible. The streets were too open, too exposed. Then he saw it. An old library stood at the intersection ahead, its heavy wooden doors still intact. If he could get inside and barricade himself in, he might have a chance to catch his breath. Pushing his body to its limits, he charged toward the entrance, ignoring the stinging in his muscles. Just a little further. Reaching the doors, he grabbed the iron handles and yanked. Locked. "Come on, come on." The snarling grew louder. The horde was closing in fast. Frantically, Ethan looked around. His eyes landed on a large trash bin against the side of the building, leading up to a second-floor window that was slightly ajar. He didn't think. He moved. Scrambling onto the bin, he pushed himself up, gripping the rusted window ledge. His muscles screamed in protest as he hauled himself through the narrow opening, barely squeezing inside before dropping onto the floor with a hard thud. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He crawled to the window and peered down. The undead had reached the doors. Their clawed hands slammed against the wood, their fingers scraping against the surface. A few sniffed the air, sensing his presence, their milky eyes scanning hungrily. For now, they hadn't found another way in. Ethan exhaled, pressing his back against the wall. He was safe. For now. The library was eerily quiet, the dust-covered shelves standing like forgotten sentinels. Dim light filtered through the cracked windows, illuminating the faded titles of books that no one would ever read again. Ethan moved cautiously, stepping over fallen books and overturned chairs. There had to be something useful here, maps, records, anything that could tell him what happened to this city. Then, something caught his eye. A leather-bound journal lay open on a nearby desk, its yellowed pages filled with hastily scribbled writing. He picked it up, scanning the words. The quarantine failed. They said the city was safe, but it was a lie. We were trapped. The military abandoned us. The infection spreads too fast. If you're reading this, don't trust anyone. The infected aren't the only monsters left. Ethan's grip tightened on the journal. The city hadn't just been overrun, it had been sacrificed. A sudden noise snapped him to attention. A creaking floorboard. Someone, or something, was in the library with him. He slowly reached for his rusted pipe, his heart pounding. Then, a voice. Low. Rough. You shouldn't be here. Ethan spun around, raising his weapon. A man stood in the shadows between the bookshelves, half hidden in the dim light. He was older, with graying hair and a sharp gaze that held no warmth. In his hands, he held a rifle, aimed directly at Ethan. Ethan didn't move. Neither did the man. Then, the stranger spoke again, his voice like gravel. You made a mistake coming here, kid. Outside, the undead continued their relentless assault on the doors. And Ethan realized, he wasn't sure which was more dangerous. The monsters outside. Or the man standing in front of him. Ethan's grip on the rusted pipe tightened. The man before him, older, weathered, and armed, kept the rifle trained on him, his expression unreadable. In the dim light of the library, the tension between them was thick, suffocating. The stranger took a step forward. You alone? Ethan hesitated. Lie, and he might survive. Tell the truth, and he might end up with a bullet in his head. Yeah, he finally said. The man studied him for a moment before lowering his rifle slightly. Then you're lucky I found you before they did. They? Ethan asked warily. The man didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward a back hallway. Come with me. If you want to live. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but what choice did he have? Outside, the undead pounded on the doors, their guttural growls seeping through the walls like a death omen. If the stranger had food, water, hell, even just information, it was worth the risk. He nodded. Lead the way. The man led Ethan deeper into the library, past dusty bookshelves and dimly lit corridors. Eventually, they reached a heavy metal door. The stranger knocked 3 times in a specific rhythm. A moment passed. Then, the door creaked open. Ethan tensed as he stepped inside. It was an old staff room, converted into a makeshift safe house. The walls were lined with supplies, canned food, bottled water, medical kits. But what caught Ethan's attention were the people. There were 3 of them. A woman in her 30s, dark hair tied back, arms crossed with suspicion. A younger guy, maybe 20, sharpening a blade. And an older man, sitting in the corner with a bandaged leg, watching Ethan carefully. The rifle-wielding stranger locked the door behind them. This is what's left of us. The woman eyed Ethan. Where did you come from? Nowhere, Ethan said. I woke up here. Didn't even know the city was like this. The younger guy scoffed. Yeah, well. Welcome to hell. The rifleman, clearly the leader, cut in. Name's Lucas. We've been holding out here for weeks. Staying quiet. Avoiding the others. Ethan frowned. Others? Lucas hesitated. Then, he motioned for Ethan to follow him to a small, dust-covered window. Ethan peered outside. Beyond the horde of zombies, in the distance, he saw movement, people. But they weren't running. They were hunting. A group of survivors, armed and dangerous, prowled through the streets, dragging someone behind them. The person kicked and screamed, but the captors laughed, shoving them forward. Ethan felt a chill creep up his spine. What the hell? Not everyone left in this city is looking for salvation, Lucas murmured. Some are just looking for fresh meat. Ethan swallowed hard. The living weren't just fighting to survive. Some had turned into monsters themselves. Lucas turned to Ethan. "You're not staying here." Ethan stiffened. "What?" The woman, Samantha, nodded. "We can't take in strays. We barely have enough for ourselves." "You don't even know if he's infected," the younger guy, Derek, added. "We can't risk it." Ethan's frustration flared. "Are you kidding me? I just barely escaped with my life, and you're throwing me back out there?" Lucas sighed. "You don't get it, kid. We're already dead men walking. Staying in one place too long, trusting the wrong people, that's how you end up as one of them." Ethan clenched his fists. "So what, you're just going to let me die out there?" Lucas was silent. Then, bang! The sound of gunfire outside shattered the tension. Samantha rushed to the window. Shit! They heard that. Outside, the armed scavengers were now looking in their direction. One of them pointed toward the library. They were coming. Lucas cursed under his breath. "You want to stay? Then fight." He tossed Ethan a knife. No time to argue. No time to think. Because now, the dead weren't the only threat. The living were coming for them. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before Lucas barked orders. "Samantha, get the supplies. Derek, lock the doors and cover the windows. Ethan, stay close and don't do anything stupid." Ethan clenched the knife in his hand. He wasn't ready for this. But it didn't matter, ready or not, the fight was coming to them. Outside, the scavengers moved quickly, spreading out as they approached the library. There were 5 of them, all armed, 2 with rifles, 1 with a machete, the others carrying handguns. One of them called out, his voice carrying through the shattered city. "We know you're in there. Don't make this hard on yourselves. Open up, and we might let you live." Lucas muttered, "Lying bastards." Ethan swallowed hard. "What do they want?" Samantha glared at him. "What do you think?" "Supplies. Ammo. Us." The pounding on the library doors started seconds later. Derek pulled his knife. "They won't waste too many bullets. They'll come in close." Lucas nodded. "Good. We'll take them one by one." But Ethan barely heard them. His mind raced. The undead were still outside too, drawn by the gunshot from earlier. If the scavengers broke in, the noise of a fight would only make things worse. Trapped between the living and the dead. Nowhere to run. No way to hide. Unless... Ethan turned to Lucas. "We need to get out of here. Now." Lucas frowned. "And go where?" "They've got us surrounded." Ethan shook his head. "Not everywhere. You said you've been here for weeks, there's got to be another way out." Samantha hesitated. "There's an underground passage. A tunnel in the basement. It connects to the subway system." Lucas looked at her sharply. "That tunnel's a death trap." "Better than staying here," Ethan argued. "If we stay, we die. If we run, at least we have a chance." The pounding on the doors grew louder. Lucas looked at his team, then back at Ethan. Finally, he cursed. "Fine. But if we die in there, it's on you." They moved fast. Samantha led the way, pushing open a hidden trapdoor beneath a bookshelf. The air that rushed up was damp and stale. A narrow, rusted staircase led downward into darkness. One by one, they climbed down. Ethan was the last. Just as he started closing the trapdoor, he heard the front doors of the library splinter and break. Shouts filled the air. The scavengers were inside. Ethan shut the trapdoor and followed the others into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow, the walls lined with rusted pipes. It smelled of mold, decay, and something worse. Lucas walked ahead with a flashlight, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "If we can reach the subway station, we might have a way out of the city." Ethan exhaled, gripping his knife. They had escaped one danger. But something told him the worst was yet to come. The tunnel stretched before them, damp and suffocating. The only sound was their hurried footsteps splashing against the wet floor. The further they moved, the darker it became, the stale air thick with the scent of decay. Ethan stayed close behind Lucas, gripping his knife tightly. Samantha and Derek followed behind, their breathing controlled but tense. No one spoke. Above them, muffled shouts echoed through the ceiling. The scavengers were inside the library, searching for them. "We need to move faster," Lucas whispered. "If they find this tunnel, we're screwed." Ethan nodded. The passage sloped downward, leading them deeper beneath the city. The walls became narrower, closing in as if trying to swallow them whole. Then, they saw it. A rusted metal gate blocked the path ahead. Beyond it, an old subway tunnel stretched into darkness. Lucas tested the gate. Locked. "Of course," he muttered, adjusting his rifle. Derek stepped forward, pulling a crowbar from his pack. "I got this." As he wedged the crowbar into the gate, Ethan turned, his gut twisting with unease. Something felt off. The tunnel behind them was silent. Too silent. Then, a faint drip. A shuffle. Ethan's pulse spiked. He squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing. Just shadows. Then, another sound. Closer this time. Drip. Drip. Drag. Ethan's heart pounded. "Guys." Lucas turned. "What?" Then, they heard it. A deep, guttural breath. Ethan's stomach dropped. "We're not alone." A sudden screech tore through the tunnel as something moved, fast. A figure lunged from the darkness, knocking Derek to the ground. Ethan barely had time to process what he was seeing. It wasn't like the zombies above. This thing was different. Faster. Stronger. Its bones jutted unnaturally from its gray skin. Its fingers ended in jagged claws. Its mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Derek screamed as the creature pinned him down. Lucas reacted instantly, raising his rifle. Bang! The shot echoed through the tunnel. The creature shrieked, flinching as the bullet tore through its shoulder, but it didn't go down. Ethan didn't hesitate. He charged, driving his knife into the thing's side. It screeched, whipping its head toward him. Its empty, black eyes locked onto his. Then, with unnatural speed, it swiped at him. Ethan barely dodged, stumbling backward. Samantha rushed forward, swinging a metal pipe. It cracked against the creature's skull, sending it reeling. Lucas didn't waste the opportunity. He fired again. This time, the bullet struck the creature's head. It let out a strangled cry before collapsing, its body twitching before falling still. Silence followed. Ethan's chest heaved. What the hell was that? Lucas kicked the creature's lifeless body. Something worse. Derek groaned, sitting up, his face pale. That thing, it wasn't like the others. Samantha wiped the sweat from her forehead. And the gunshot just told everyone where we are. Lucas cursed. We need to move. Derek wrenched the gate open, and they rushed into the subway tunnel. As they disappeared into the darkness, Ethan risked one last glance at the creature's body. Something about it felt wrong. And then, he saw it. The creature's fingers twitched. Its black eyes flickered. It wasn't dead. It was evolving. Ethan's breath came in short, sharp gasps as he hurried through the dark subway tunnel. The others were right behind him, their footsteps echoing through the abandoned underground. The stale air carried the scent of mold, rust, and something far worse, the stench of death. Lucas led the way with his flashlight, his rifle raised. We keep moving. No stopping. If those things are down here, we need to find a way out before we're trapped. Derek groaned as he clutched his injured arm. That thing, it wasn't like the others. It moved faster. It thought. Ethan glanced back, his stomach twisting. I know. They had all seen it. The way the creature reacted. The way it almost seemed to recognize them. The infected were changing. And that meant nowhere was safe anymore. The subway tracks stretched endlessly into the dark. Abandoned train cars sat rusting along the platform, their shattered windows staring like empty eyes. A thick silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Samantha scanned their surroundings. We need to find a way up. There should be an emergency exit leading back to the surface. Lucas nodded. Spread out. Stay quiet. They moved carefully, weapons drawn. Ethan's hands trembled around the hilt of his knife. He had faced death too many times in the past few hours, but something about this place felt worse. Like the dead were watching. Then, a noise. A soft scraping. Ethan froze. Did you hear that? Samantha turned, her eyes narrowing. Yeah. Derek swallowed hard. Where's it coming from? The answer came a second later. From everywhere. The shadows along the walls shifted. Shapes emerged, dozens of them. Figures moved through the wreckage, their milky eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't normal zombies. These were like the creature they had fought earlier, faster, stronger, smarter. And now, they were surrounded. Lucas raised his rifle. Get ready. Samantha gritted her teeth, gripping her metal pipe. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. We can't fight all of them. The creatures let out guttural snarls, their bodies twitching as they prepared to attack. Then, one of them spoke. A raspy, broken voice, barely recognizable as human. Run. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Derek whispered, Did that thing just talk? Before anyone could react, the creatures lunged. Lucas fired. The gunshots roared through the tunnel, but the creatures barely flinched. Samantha swung her pipe, knocking one back, but another leapt onto her, clawing at her arm. Ethan dodged a snapping jaw, stabbing his knife into a creature's side. It shrieked, but instead of collapsing, it grabbed him, its fingers digging into his shoulder. Panic surged through him. They weren't just biting. They were grabbing. Dragging. They weren't just here to kill. They were here to take them. Ethan struggled, kicking wildly. The creature's grip tightened. Then, a train horn. The sound was deafening, shaking the tunnel. A set of headlights burst to life down the tracks, blindingly bright. An actual train was barreling toward them. Lucas grabbed Ethan, yanking him back. Move! The survivors dove onto the platform just as the train slammed into the horde, crushing the creatures beneath its wheels. Screeches of pain filled the air. Ethan hit the ground hard, gasping for breath. The train screeched to a halt. And then, silence. Derek coughed. Holy shit, was that a train? Samantha sat up, panting. Who the hell is driving it? Ethan turned, staring at the train doors. As if in answer, they slid open with a mechanical hiss. A voice called out from inside. If you want to live, get in. Ethan locked eyes with Lucas. They had no choice. The survivors scrambled to their feet and rushed inside. As soon as the last one boarded, the doors shut, and the train lurched forward. Ethan collapsed into a seat, his body shaking. They had escaped, again. But now, there was a new question. Who was driving this train? The train rumbled through the darkness, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks the only sound inside. Ethan's heart still pounded from the chaos of the subway tunnel. He glanced around at the others, Lucas, Samantha, and Derek, each catching their breath, trying to process what had just happened. Then, his gaze shifted toward the front of the train. A single figure stood there, hands gripping the controls. The driver was a middle-aged man, his face gaunt, his clothes tattered. A pistol rested in a holster at his side. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting Ethan's for a brief moment. You're lucky, the man said, his voice rough. Another 10 seconds and you'd be one of them. Ethan swallowed. Who are you? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept his focus on the tunnel ahead. Name's Grant. Been keeping this train running for weeks, picking up the last few stragglers in the city. Samantha shifted in her seat, still gripping her metal pipe. How the hell is this train even working? Grant smirked. Generators. This thing runs on its own power source. While the world up there fell apart, I kept it moving. Figured the dead wouldn't be smart enough to stop a train. Ethan's mind raced. A moving safe house. A way to stay ahead of the infected. It almost seemed too good to be true. Lucas, always skeptical, folded his arms. Where are you taking us? Grant's face darkened. That depends. You looking for a way out of the city? Lucas exchanged glances with the others before nodding. That's the idea. Grant sighed. Then I got bad news. There is no way out. Silence. Ethan felt his stomach sink. What do you mean? Grant tightened his grip on the controls. The roads are destroyed. Bridges collapsed. And whatever's left of the military. They sealed off the entire area. This city is a quarantine zone. No one's coming in. And no one's getting out. Derek shook his head. That's impossible. There has to be a way. Grant let out a bitter laugh. I thought the same thing. Then I watched a group try to escape last week. They reached the outskirts, and the army burned them alive. The horror of it settled over them like a thick fog. No way out. No rescue. Just them, trapped in a city crawling with monsters. The train rattled over a broken section of track, shaking violently. Sparks flickered from the overhead lights. Ethan sat forward. Then what's the plan? Just keep riding this train until we run out of fuel? Grant exhaled. No. There might be one option. Everyone leaned in. Grant continued. There's an old maintenance tunnel, a way underground that leads past the quarantine barrier. Problem is, I don't know if it's still clear. Samantha frowned. And if it's not? Grant's expression hardened. Then we die. Ethan looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at Samantha. Samantha looked at Derek. No one spoke, but the answer was clear. They had to try. Because staying in this city meant only one thing. Death. The train slowed, approaching an abandoned station. Grant pulled the lever, bringing it to a stop. This is it, he said. If we're doing this, we do it now. Ethan stood, his fingers tightening around his knife. Lucas checked his rifle. Samantha took a deep breath. Derek rolled his shoulders. Then, together, they stepped off the train and into the unknown. The last chance for survival. The final gamble. No turning back now.